The alarm went off at 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to, because the clock on Maya Reeves' nightstand had been running fast ever since Darius dropped it trying to reach for his water glass in the dark. That was 8 months ago. She hadn't replaced it. She hadn't replaced a lot of things. Maya lay still for a moment in the gray Chicago dark, listening to the apartment breathe around her. The radiator knocked and hissed in the hallway. Somewhere above her, old Mr. Petrakis was already moving around his kitchen, his slippered feet shuffling across the linoleum in the same pattern he'd kept for 40 years. And from the small bedroom down the hall, the one that used to be a home office, the one she'd repainted pale yellow the summer she was pregnant and still believed everything was going to be fine, came the soft, tangled sounds of 3 boys sleeping. She got up. That was the whole secret, she'd decided. Not optimism, not faith, though she still held on to faith like a rope over water, just the physical act of getting up, putting her feet on the cold floor, moving toward the kitchen, starting the coffee. Maya Reeves was 34 years old. She had deep brown skin, natural hair she rarely found time to properly care for anymore, and eyes that Darius used to say looked like they already knew the punchline to every joke. She was 5'4" and had lost 11 pounds in the past year that she could not afford to lose. She wore the same 3 work shirts in rotation, 2 from her day job at Feldman's Grocery on West Cermak, 1 plain white button-down for the office cleaning shift she picked up 4 nights a week at a downtown insurance building on Michigan Avenue. The triplets, Marcus, Malik, and Miles, had turned 6 in February. They had been born 11 weeks premature, each of them small enough to cup in 2 hands, each of them fighters from the first breath. Darius had stood in that NICU and cried in a way Maya had never seen a grown man cry, his big shoulders heaving, his hands pressed flat against the incubator glass as if he could push his own strength through it. "They're going to be something," he'd said. "All 3 of them. You watch." Darius Reeves had been a city bus driver. He had died 14 months ago when a distracted driver ran a red light at 6 in the morning and hit his bus broadside while he was making a turn on Roosevelt Road. He was 36. He had 11 years on the job and a perfect safety record, and a joke for everyone he ever met, and a way of laughing that filled whatever room he was in completely, the way good music fills a room, leaving no empty corners. The insurance had covered the funeral and 3 months of rent. The city's survivor benefits were modest and slow, and required forms Maya filled out at the kitchen table at midnight after the boys were asleep. The park on Maple Street was not an impressive park. It occupied half a city block in the Pilsen neighborhood, wedged between a tire shop and a row of 2 flats with painted wooden porches. It had a swing set missing 1 swing, a climbing structure with a slide that gave off a mild static shock in dry weather, a basketball hoop with no net, and 4 wooden benches arranged around a central patch of grass that was crabgrass thin in the summer and mud thick in the spring. There was a single oak tree large enough to provide real shade, and it was under this tree, on the bench closest to it, that the boys had claimed their territory for the summer. They came to the park 3 or 4 afternoons a week. Maya, on the days she was home before dark, would sit on the bench and half watch them while she reviewed bills or texted with her mother in Memphis, or simply sat with her eyes closed, letting the particular sound of her children playing wash over her like something she could almost afford to rest inside. It was a Friday, the last Friday in June, when she first noticed the man on the far bench. He was there when they arrived, sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped in front of him, looking at nothing. He was white, somewhere in his mid to late 50s, with silver hair gone uncut long enough to look not stylish but simply unattended. He wore good clothes, khaki pants, a collared shirt, the kind of clothes that once had been carefully chosen and were now simply what remained in the closet. He had the look of someone who had once been physically vigorous and had recently, through an application of grief or illness or just the grinding passage of time, become somewhat less than that. He didn't look at the boys. He didn't look at much of anything. He was simply there, the way a piece of furniture is simply there. Marcus noticed him first. Marcus noticed everyone. "Who's that man?" he asked, not quietly. "I don't know, baby. Don't bother him, baby." "He looks sad." "Marcus, he does, though." Maya glanced at the man. He hadn't reacted to the conversation, which meant either he hadn't heard them or he was very far away inside himself. He was there the next Tuesday, and the Friday after that. By the second week of July, his presence on the far bench had become part of the park's furniture to the boys, which meant it was only a matter of time before Marcus decided to make it part of their furniture too. "What's your name?" Marcus asked him with no preamble on a Tuesday afternoon while Maya was momentarily distracted by a phone call from the gas company. The man looked at him with the same slightly startled expression Miles had earned. "Robert," he said. "Robert Callahan." "I'm Marcus. Those are my brothers Malik and Miles. We're triplets." "I can see that," Robert said. "Most people can't right away. You're smart." Marcus sat down on the bench next to him with the easy confidence of someone who has never once considered that his company might not be welcome. "Why do you always sit here?" "I like it here." "It's not a very good park." Robert looked around at the park for a moment, as if genuinely reconsidering it. "No," he said, "I suppose it isn't." "It's ours, though," Marcus said. "We come every week. You can sit with us if you want." "I think I'll stay over here." "That's okay too," Marcus said. "I'll come visit." And he did. From that Tuesday forward, at least part of every park visit included Marcus making his way to Robert's bench for what could only be called a social call. 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes of mostly one-sided conversation that Robert endured with increasing, if carefully unexpressed, patience. Malik came next. He arrived at Robert's bench one afternoon with a specific question that had apparently been building for some time. "Do you know how engines work?" "Somewhat," Robert said. "Our car makes a sound," Malik said, pushing his glasses up. "Like," he made a grinding, rhythmic sound with his teeth and throat that was remarkably accurate. "When you first start it. Could be a starter motor, could be a belt." "Is that expensive?" Robert looked at him for a moment. "Depends," he said. "Mom says everything depends," Malik said. "Your mom's right about that." "She knows a lot," Malik agreed. "But she doesn't know engines." "Not many people do." "Your dad?" "He died," Malik said, in the direct, factual. Robert Callahan had been coming to the park on Maple Street since the third week of May. He lived 22 minutes away, in a condominium on the 41st floor of a building in the West Loop that had a fitness center he hadn't used in over a year, a concierge who greeted him by name with an increasingly careful neutrality, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city he had built a significant portion of his life inside. The condo had cost him $2.3 million 8 years ago, and it felt, at this point in his life, like living inside a very expensive storage unit for his grief. Robert had started Callahan Group in 1994 with $40,000 borrowed from his father and a business plan he'd written on legal pads at a kitchen table in a one-bedroom in Wicker Park. The company developed commercial real estate, initially small warehouse conversions, then mid-sized office buildings, then, as the years compounded, larger and larger projects across the Midwest and Southeast. By 2015, Callahan Group had a portfolio worth over $800 million and employed 340 people. Robert had been profiled in Crain's Chicago Business 4 times. He had a relationship with the mayor's office, a box at Wrigley Field, and a reputation for being a hard but fair man who had never once stopped working. His wife, Patricia, had left him in 2018. Not dramatically, not with accusations or theater, just a quiet, exhausted departure that she had explained in a 3-page letter left on the kitchen counter, the essential message of which was, "I have been married to your work for 23 years, and I am tired, Robert. I am so tired." She was living in Scottsdale now, remarried. He bore her no ill will. He understood, in the clear-eyed way he could understand things about himself as long as he didn't have to act on the understanding, that she had been right. His daughter, Lily, had been 26 years old when she died. He did not, even now, even in the privacy of his own mind, approach that fact directly. He came at it sideways, the way you approach a very bright light, aware of it, oriented toward it, never quite looking at it straight. Lily had been Patricia's daughter too, of course, but she had been, in the particular and irreducible way of things, primarily his. She had his coloring, his stubbornness, his inconvenient habit of saying exactly what she meant. She had seen him clearly and loved him anyway. And she had died 19 months ago of a brain aneurysm that gave her approximately 4 hours warning and took her before Robert's flight from Atlanta had even landed. He had not, in any meaningful sense, worked since. His deputy, a capable woman named Sandra Chen, ran the company with considerable competence and called him twice a week with updates he half listened to in the way you half listen to things when you are still mostly somewhere else. He attended the board meetings that were unavoidable and signed the documents that required. The car was a 2014 Honda Accord with 140,000 miles on it, gray with a crack running across the lower third of the windshield and a rear passenger door that only opened from the inside. It lived on the street in front of Maya's building, and it was, he could see clearly when he walked by it one morning in early July, in considerable distress. Malik had told him about the sound. Robert had Googled it. The description Malik had given was accurate enough to narrow it down. Starter motor or serpentine belt, almost certainly. On a car this age, with this mileage, the belt was the more likely candidate. And if it failed completely, she'd be stranded. He walked around the car. The tires were low. The rear wiper blade was torn. The crack in the windshield had spread. He stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, thinking about it in the way he thought about things, systematically, practically, clearing away the complications to find the simple truth underneath. The simple truth was that this car was going to leave a woman who worked 2 jobs without transportation, and that this was a problem he could solve. He called a mechanic he'd used for years. He didn't say anything to anyone about it. On a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks into July, Maya came downstairs at 5:30 to drive to her grocery shift and found her car parked in the same spot it always was, but with 4 new tires, a new windshield, and a small handwritten note tucked under the wiper blade that read, "Serpentine belt replaced too. Should run well now. R." She stood on the sidewalk for a full minute. She was not, by temperament, a woman who accepted charity without complication. She had been raised by a woman who paid her own way and taught her daughter to do the same, and the years of her marriage had been years in which she and Darius had solved their own problems, together, as a team. The solo years since his death had only deepened. It was Marcus who started calling him that. It was a Saturday in mid-July, and Robert had, on an uncharacterized impulse, shown up at the park with a bag of supplies for what he had mentally described to himself as a practical demonstration. He'd brought 3 balsa wood model airplane kits, the kind you assemble with small pieces and rubber band propulsion, because Malik had mentioned the week before that he wanted to know about aerodynamics, and because Marcus had mentioned, in passing, that they had never built anything. He'd set up at the picnic table near the oak tree rather than his usual bench, and the boys had appeared at his elbow within 30 seconds of his arrival, as if they had some animal sense for when something interesting was happening. "What is that?" Marcus demanded. "Airplanes," Robert said, "if you want to build them." "We want to build them," Marcus confirmed, on behalf of all 3 of them, without consulting either of them. "We might want to check," Malik said. "We want to," Miles said quietly, and sat down. So they built them. Robert was surprised to find that he was a decent teacher, patient, precise, good at explaining the why behind each step. Malik was meticulous and asked questions at every stage. Marcus built fast and imprecisely, and his plane had a slight warp in the left wing that Robert helped him correct. Miles worked slowly and silently, and produced, in the end, the most accurate model of the three, assembled with a care that went beyond the merely mechanical. Maya watched from the bench. Robert was aware of her watching. He was aware also of trying not to be aware of it. When the planes were done, they went to the open end of the park and launched them. Marcus's flew in a brief, enthusiastic arc and nosedived into the grass. Malik's sailed in a long, stable glide that surprised everyone. Miles went the farthest, riding an updraft none of them had anticipated, climbing until it was barely visible against the pale summer sky. "Uncle Rob!" Marcus shouted, the way he shouted everything, fully from the bottom of his lungs. "Did you see that? Miles won!" Robert had been watching the small balsa plane disappear into the sky. He turned at the name. Uncle Rob. He looked at Marcus, who had not noticed what he'd said, or didn't recognize it as anything requiring notice. It had simply come out, the natural label his brain had assigned to this person who was not quite a stranger and not quite anything else. Robert looked at Maya. She was watching him from the bench, and her expression was careful, not apologetic, not warning, just watching to see how he took it. He turned back to the boys. "Yes," he said, and his voice was only slightly unsteady. "Yes, Miles won." After that, he was Uncle Rob. He started bringing things. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that would land like charity rather than friendship. He was, he realized, learning to read Maya from a distance with reasonable accuracy. It was Malik who finally asked him directly. They were sitting at the picnic table one afternoon in August, just the two of them, because Marcus was on the climbing structure and Miles was drawing near the oak tree, and Malik was quizzing Robert about bridge engineering, which had been his current obsession for 2 weeks. "Why do you know so much about building things?" Malik asked. "It's my job," Robert said. "What kind of job?" "Real estate development. I buy land and buildings and make them into other things." "Like what?" "Office buildings, mostly, some apartment buildings, some mixed use." Malik pushed his glasses up. "Is that why you paid our electric bill?" Robert looked at him. "Mom got a letter that said it was paid anonymously," Malik said, "but you're the only person we know who has money. Marcus said so." "Marcus says a lot of things." "He's usually right," Malik said. "I ran the probability." Robert was quiet for a moment. "It was just a bill," he said. "It was a big bill," Malik said. "Mom cried when she got the letter, but like, good crying. She went into the bathroom, but I could tell." He adjusted his glasses again, very precisely. "Why didn't you tell her it was you?" "Because she would have tried to pay me back, and she has enough to carry." Malik thought about this for a long moment. "That's smart," he said, with genuine analytical respect. "But she'll figure it out eventually." "Probably," Robert said. "Then what?" "Then I'll tell her the truth," Robert said, and realized as he said it that this was what he intended, not to hide indefinitely, but to do the thing first and explain later, because he had learned something from Maya Reeves in these weeks without quite meaning to. Sometimes you just have to get up and move. The explaining can come after. Malik nodded, as if this satisfied whatever logical structure he'd been building. "Okay," he said. "Can we talk about tensile strength now?" September came in gold and cool, the way Chicago Septembers sometimes do before they remember to be brutal, and the park on Maple Street changed its character with the season. Fewer people, longer afternoons, the oak tree beginning its slow annual surrender of leaves. The boys started first grade. Marcus immediately became the most social child in his class, which surprised no one. Malik came home the first week with a list of factual corrections he intended to deliver to his teacher, which required a diplomatic conversation with Maya about the difference between being right and being helpful. Miles drew his teacher's portrait from memory and left it on her desk without signing it. Robert had begun in the past few weeks to come to the park even on days when he wasn't sure the family would be there. He had begun to understand that his relationship to this place had shifted. It was no longer only a memorial, a point of painful proximity to what he'd lost. It had become something else, something in the present tense. He was not blind to what was happening. He was 57 years old and had made a significant portion of his living by reading situations clearly, and he could read this one. He was becoming part of a family that was not his. This was a thing that required care. He did not want to presume. He did not want to step into a space that wasn't offered. He was aware of his own loneliness with a clinical detachment that did not make it less real, and he knew that lonely people sometimes reached for the nearest warmth in ways that were not fair to the warm. So he was careful. He stayed on his bench when he wasn't invited to the picnic table. He answered questions when asked and did not volunteer more than seemed welcome. He read Maya's signals with the same attention he'd once given to zoning board members and building inspectors, not to manipulate, but to understand. What he understood over these months was that Maya Reeves was a woman who built her world into a tight, resilient structure of her own making, and that any addition to that structure needed to fit, needed to be load-bearing rather than decorative, and needed to earn its place over time. He thought he was earning it. He hoped he was. It was Miles who found him crying. It was a Saturday in late September, a cool, Maya found out everything on an afternoon in October. Not through Malik's careful deduction, though that had been coming, not through any one revelation. She found it because she was good at paying attention, and because she had been paying attention to Robert Callahan for 4 months, and because she had started, quietly, to wonder. She looked him up one evening after the boys were asleep. It took less than 5 minutes. His name was in the Cranes profile she found, with his company, his general history. She sat at her kitchen table with her phone and read about Callahan Group and its portfolio and its reputation, and she felt something that was not quite anger and not quite hurt, something more like the vertigo of a ground shifting underfoot. She sat with it for 2 days. She went to work, she picked up the boys, she made dinner, she went to her cleaning shift, she came home and didn't sleep much. She sat with the question of what this meant and who he was to them and who he was to her, and what it meant that a man with resources she couldn't fully comprehend had been quietly, unobtrusively restructuring their lives. On the 3rd day, she went to the park. He was there. He was always there. She sat down on his bench, not the picnic table, not her usual bench, his bench. He made room without comment. "I looked you up," she said. He nodded. He'd been expecting this, she could tell. He had, she realized, probably been expecting it for a while. "You could have told me," she said. "I could have," he said. "I didn't know how it would land." "I'm not sure how it's landing," she admitted. "I'm still figuring that out." She looked at her hands. "The clothes, the heat in the building, the electric bill." "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry if—" "Don't apologize," she said. I need to know why." She looked at him directly. "Not the surface reason, the real one." He was quiet for a long moment. The October wind moved through the oak tree, and several leaves came down in slow spirals, and somewhere across the park a child was calling a name. "I came to this park because I lost my daughter," he said, 19 months ago. "I brought her here once when she was doing research. It was an ordinary afternoon. I didn't know it was going to matter." He paused. "I came back because I needed to be somewhere that still held her." Maya was very still. "And your boys found me," he said, "which is what your boys do. They find things, they claim them, they make them theirs. And he stopped, started again. "I had stopped being good at being alive," he said. "I had been managing it, going through the motions. But your boys are very bad at letting people go through motions. The mentoring had become concrete in ways Robert hadn't initially anticipated. He'd started visiting the school, in a capacity approved by the principal, a woman named Dr. Forsyth, who was practical and resource-aware and immediately recognized a useful presence when one appeared. He came in twice a month to talk to the first-grade classes about building and design, bringing models, drawing diagrams, asking questions. He was, he discovered, surprisingly good with children in groups, not because he'd had practice, but because he took them seriously. He listened to their answers. He treated their ideas as worth examining. He had also begun talking to Dr. Forsyth about the school's infrastructure, the aging HVAC system, the gymnasium floor that had been submitted for repair 4 times without result, the lack of outdoor seating near the playground that made yard duty difficult in all weather. He had done this not with any grand announcement, but with the quiet, practical engagement of someone who has decided that this is now his neighborhood too. For Malik, he had sourced a Saturday engineering program at the Illinois Institute of Technology that accepted gifted students as young as 8 and had sent the materials home with Maya with a note that said, "For when he's ready, no rush." He'd also, on a separate and unrelated occasion, asked his own accountant to look into college savings vehicles that were optimally structured for families with multiple children, which was information he passed to Maya in the form of a single sheet of paper with the relevant highlights circled, with no comment about his own possible contribution to any such fund. That would be a later conversation. They had time for later conversations. For Miles, he had done something that had taken more nerve than he expected. He had shown Miles's drawings, a small collection, digitally photographed with Maya's permission, to a friend who ran a non-profit arts education organization on the North Side. The friend had been, in Robert's description to Maya, enthusiastic in a way that seems credible. There was a Saturday program for young visual artists. There was a scholarship fund. There were real teachers who would know what to do with a 6-year-old who drew suspension bridges and portraits and the precise emotional content of lonely men on park benches. Miles had said, when told about the program, "Do they have good pencils?" Robert had confirmed that they did. Miles had said, "Okay," with the composure of someone who has decided not to be overwhelmed with good news, and gone back to his drawing. For Marcus, Robert had done something simpler and perhaps more valuable. He had shown up. He had attended the school's small family breakfast for first-grade parents in November and sat next to Maya and shaken hands with Marcus's teacher and listened to Marcus explain with extraordinary self-satisfaction that he had made more friends in his class than any other student and that this was a personal record. He had attended the boys' fall performance, a 20-minute school show in the gymnasium, and sat in the folding chairs with the other parents and clapped until his hands hurt when Marcus forgot half his lines and improvised the rest with unearned confidence. He had shown up. It was not a heroic act. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. But for the boys, for Marcus especially, who had lost the man he'd been watching show up his whole short life, it was not nothing. Maya had made some decisions too. She had told her mother in Memphis on a Sunday phone call in October about the man from the park. Her mother, a sharp-tongued, warm-hearted woman named Ruth, who had raised Maya alone after her own husband's departure and who had very decided opinions about most things, had been quiet for a long time after the telling, which was not like her. "He fixes cars and pays electric bills," Ruth said finally. "Yes. And he's 6 with your children." "Yes." "And he's not asking for anything?" "No." "Well," Ruth said, and was quiet for another moment, "your daddy would have said that's a man who's paying something back to the universe, that people who've had things taken from them sometimes need to give something to balance it out." She paused. "Sounds to me like you're both balancing something out." Maya had thought about this for a long time. She was not, she knew with a clarity she trusted, looking for a replacement for Darius. She did not want a replacement for Darius. Darius was specific and irreplaceable, and she had loved him in a way that did not divide and did not diminish. She kept his photograph on the kitchen shelf. She told the boys his stories. She kept him present in the house and in their lives as a full and real person, not a ghost. But she was also 34 years old, and she was alone in ways that exhausted her on the days when the exhaustion was about more than work, and she had discovered that there was room in a life for more than one kind of relationship with another person, and that one of those kinds was this: a person who showed up, who paid attention, who was honest about his damage and generous with his presence, who sat on a park bench on the far side of the grass and waited to see if the distance between them would close naturally, without pressure, at the right pace for everyone involved. She had cut back her cleaning shift from 4 nights a week